Hi there, Doug from TauStats. One of the most frequently asked questions is, how do I start mining on the Bittensor network? And the answer is a kind of an interesting one. It's very different than most other blockchains, is that you don't actually mine on Bittensor. The mining is done on the various subnets. And this image of a miner was actually created in subnet 19 by a miner. There are 32 subnets on Bittensor network. Each subnet's working on a machine learning problem or creating a digital commodity. As a result, they're all very, very different, and they all have very different requirements and different code for mining. So you don't actually, that's why I say you don't mine on Bittensor, you're actually mining on the subnets. Each one of the subnets has space for about 200 to 220 miners. That means that mining is also a competition. And if your miner has the lowest active key for a subnet, you're going to be deregistered when a new miner registers. So it's important to realize that not only is mining challenging in that you have to pick your subnet and then become an expert in that subnet, but it's also a competition against all the other miners. The way you pick which subnet to mine on is by doing some research. And at TauStats in our documentation, you can see a listing of all of the subnets. And for each one of the subnets, we'll have a link to the GitHub and a link to the hardware requirements for mining and validating on that subnet. The GitHub generally has a very good README that describes the steps that you need to do. It tells you a little bit about what the subnet is doing. And then it might also have links to other documentation so that to help you get started understanding what the subnet does and how the subnet works and how you can mine on that subnet. The min compute YAML generally has the hardware requirements, so you can see how many CPUs, whether it needs a GPU or a CPU, how much memory, what OS, etc., how much storage you need. Another way to do some of this research is to get into the Bittensor Discord. You can see each one of the subnets has a channel. You can see when I took this screenshot, there was actually a release for subnet 1. So as you read through these messages, you can get some hints, some tricks. You can read about mining, where people are struggling. And then you can also look up at the pin messages. That's generally where you will find the release notes, where you will find changes and things that the mods for this, the subnet owners have decided to share and have made important, so they'll pin them to the channel. Another way to learn about the subnet is to go to TauStats. And on the registration tab for the subnet, you can see how much it costs to register. You can see that at this point for subnet 1, it's costing 0.05 tau. You can also see it changes over time. So maybe you're like, oh, this is a little high right now. I'll wait a few hours for the price to go down. That's fair. When you register a node on the subnet, you'll be granted an immunity period. And so that immunity period helps you go from 0 emission to a higher amount of emission so you don't get deregistered right away. You can see you can use the Bittensor command line to hit subnet hyperparameters. And for subnet 1, the immunity period is 4,096 blocks, which at 12 seconds, a block is about 13 and a half hours. Each subnet has a default miner that you can run. Now you can imagine with 200 plus miners running on a subnet, if everybody's using the default miner, you're not going to pull ahead. So everybody's modifying the miner, right? Everybody is making changes so that they're better than the other miners in the subnet. So you can try it with the default miner, but you might want to test it out and see what you can do to improve that miner so that you float to the top. Once you've tested out your miner, you've made your modifications, and you're ready to launch, you can use the again, the Bittensor command line to register your hotkey, and you'll need a little bit of tau on the cold key to make that work. And now you're up and running. You'll want to track your incentive in the subnet metagraph. The incentive leads to emission, and then, of course, emission leads to the tau that you will earn. And as your emission grows, you can see here in this chart, the orange miners all have immunity, And this blue guy right here is the lowest active key. So when somebody new registers, this guy's out. So you want to modify your miner so that when you come out of immunity, you're up here, or even ideally way up here. But you want to find your way up into this space where you're safe so that you don't get deregistered. And you can do the mathematics of like how long you need to stay active to pay for the registration costs and your machine costs and all of that. And your own personal economics to decide whether it's working for you or not. Taostats has a wealth of information for miners. If you have any questions, we've got a Discord, and like and subscribe so that you can get more videos about how to be successful in the Bittensor ecosystem.